Hey everybody, this is Seth Haynes from musiciansguide to hustling.com here today with another interview. We have Dan Dunford today. Dan, first off, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you blocking off a little time in your schedule to come on. For anyone that's not familiar with Dan runs the Divergent Paths podcast, which is a podcast for musicians. And Dan, can you actually just, I could probably talk for 2 minutes about the stuff you do, but I would much rather hear from you. So can you tell everybody who you are, what your background is, and what you do?
So I'm just a kind of a run-of-the-mill freelance trombonist in New York. First of all, that's I did my took my circuitous route to getting a degree in trombone.
Was that
Here
in
in
New
New.
York?
Yeah. Well, I finished up here. Because I was took me 8 years to get my bachelor's degree, so I ended up being a little bit older when I was finishing up my first degree, and
Sure.
um, kind of last summer I had just finished what I had thought was going to be a never-ending journey towards this bachelor's degree, and I you know I started working as a trombonist in the city, and of course that's my main source of income now as well, or really my only source of income now is my trombone playing. Um, but I've been a podcast listener for a most of the history of podcasts. So
Right,
I
right, right.
like past 8 years or so, I've been, I've listened to different podcasts regularly, different kinds of things. And I don't know, I'd say about 3, 4 years ago, I started getting more into interview based podcasts being, just, I like listening to people talk to each other kind of in an unfiltered, vulnerable sort of way.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get a better picture of who people are, whether that's, uh, someone that's a movie star who's made hundreds of millions of dollars in the box office, or, um, uh, a struggling stand-up comedian who has fallen on hard times after some early success. Like, no matter what, it's just really great. So continuing on that, about 2 years ago I was thinking, I'd love to try my hand at this. 2 3 years ago, and I couldn't see how that was possible, because you don't always, when you before you start something, you don't really think about, or you think that you just don't have the contact list, because you have to be able to reach out to people,
Yeah, 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 sure.
especially starting out. But so 12 months ago, basically, I decided, well, I have a good enough contact list to at least start something. Um, so one, I was on a gig one day. I let out a good deal earlier than anticipated. So I had a bunch of free time, and I went down to B&H, which is the big audio visual superstore here in the city, and bought two mics. And just kind of by the end of the week, I had taped my first interview and submitted a podcast to iTunes.
Yeah, totally.
Now, so that's kind of the background of the whole deal. The reasoning behind it is is a little more nebulous. But basically, the idea is, it's in the 21st century, musicians. Well, the tradition, what we've been led to believe are these traditional paths towards musical success. Whether your orchestras, your opera companies, your professional big bands, etc.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
There's just, while those are all still there and still have very good musicians in them, there are thousands more musicians graduating every year from music schools than there were in the past. And
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
it's silly to think that, it would be silly to think that a chance of my chance of winning a job in, say, the Philadelphia Orchestra
Sure.
now is the same as it was in 1975. It's just not the case, because now you're going to have at least, 150 people at the audition, and thousands of people sending in tapes for a pre-screening kind of a deal. Um, Assuming that's how Philadelphia does it. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
well, yeah, the
That's
concept there's a larger pool
right
of talent for these
for
positions.
fewer jobs, and those the number of those jobs have started shrinking.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
whether classical music is dead is a different conversation that I'm really not that interested in. But
No,
um,
no, no. Let's.
um, but there's the thing is there is money out there. It's just harder to find than it may have been in the past, or it's you can't just sit back, or you can't just sit in your practice room and work on your excerpts and expect to get work. I mean, you if it takes a very very singular dedication, and if that's your thing, that's fine. But for most people, that's not how it's gonna pan out.
Yeah, totally.
Um, so I was much more interested in focusing on talking to people who decided to kind of create their own way. I mean, if either they're not, orchestra isn't their thing, or if they just have much more interest in something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, people who just you know take the grab the bull by the horns and say, no, I'm going to fit this to what I do, and I'm going to get paid for it.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's just a question of musical fulfillment, more than anything else. People who aren't fulfilled by playing Heldenleben for the 14th time,
yeah,
and are more fulfilled by playing Xenakis, or a composition that's fresh off the presses, or you know playing with rock bands, or I mean, I play in rock bands, I play hip hop, I play classical, I play Broadway. Like, that's what I rather. I don't want to be stuck in a thing where I'm doing the same thing every day.
sure.
So I want to talk to people who are like taking that idea and turning it into a way of life, and a way to get paid. Really.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about that a little bit. And actually, before we even go dive in there further, one thing you said something interesting that I kind of wanted to go back to for a second. So you said like, oh, I didn't know if I didn't think I had the contact list necessarily, but then you did it anyway. So like, what were some of the things that, um, like what was there anything that you did that was like kind of surprised you, I guess, about like, this, because I think that's like a common kind of challenge a lot of people have, as they think, especially young folks starting out. There are hundreds and hundreds of people that read my site, listen to your blog, whatever it is, that probably feel like they're not ready to start because they don't have something. And one of those things that I always hear about is like, well, how do I network? How do I build these contacts? How do I get relationships? So like, what did that look like for you when you were starting this podcast? Like, where did you start with reaching out to people?
um, well, I think I even still have it on this computer, but I basically, I there was about a year period of time between when I originally thought, a year and a half maybe, but between when I originally thought, maybe I could do this, and the time I set up my first interview. So this is an 18-month period basically.
Sure.
And basically the difference was I worked more, honestly, which doesn't seem to be that helpful. And New York, let's be honest, New York is a bit different than a lot of places. You're able to, like, for me, I was already a little bit older, and I started working, doing a lot more freelance work while I was still in school. But really, how do I network? Oh man, if I had the answer, I would tell you. No,
Well, but what did it? So like, who were the first guests you reached out to? Like, who were they?
um, friends, people who, my very first guest was a trombone player who had a similar background to me, a little bit older, when he was going through school, but we had we studied with the same teacher and had lessons back to back. Now
Mm-hmm.
even though we were studying with the same guy at the same time, he's 3-4 years older than me, and does weird stuff like going to Europe and touring around playing avant-garde trombone music, and he has a lot of it's just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's more of a thing of like and from there it was just people who I had oblique connections to, like, oh, so I've played with this person's sister was a music director, was an MD for me on a musical that I did. So, and she plays with these like folk rock bands. So let's talk to her about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
contrast between classical cello and rock cello. It's just it's not so much. I think that a lot of people are better at networking than they think. It's really just taking advantage of the people you come into contact or are obliquely connected to, and honestly, just not being a dick. Uh,
Yeah,
I,
well,
I try, like, I don't know, I that's the thing, like, you try to foster a thing or a situation where you are someone that people want to be around,
yeah,
which that's a
absolutely.
big part, and that's a people are always like, oh, networking is such a pain in the ass. I'm like, well, I mean, don't necessarily don't go in and let the person know you want something from them. Like, you just kind of be a nice person, and in my case, I was going to people with something that would help them as well, like a
Absolutely,
plat. I was going
absolutely.
to them with a platform. Like, that's the thing. If you have currency to spend, so to speak,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
that
that's a
makes it
huge
a
thing
little
that a
bit
lot of
easier.
people miss.
So yeah, I mean, it's the same as, like, well, maybe so and so hasn't called you for this gig because you didn't have the currency to give them, and that in some ways that's kind of a it kind of sucks. It really does. I don't necessarily think that's fair, but that's sometimes that's just how it is. And so me having a podcast and a platform for people to talk about, I had a really long explanatory email that I've now that I have material to support what I do. I don't have to be quite as explanatory. But it was a good three, four, 5 paragraphs being like, so this is what I do. This is how it's different than other things you might have seen like it, and this is why I decided to do it. And now it's kind of like I've kind of established what I do, and I don't have to write quite as much.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there when you said you have a little bit of currency. You have value to bring to others, and I think that's like, I mean, that's really the key to like connecting with people is.
But I think the number one thing, if there's one thing that I bring to the table when it comes to this, um, it's I touched briefly on it, is that I don't really want anything from people in like a immediate sense.
Yeah, of course.
I kind of want to I kind of just want to sit and talk. I don't want this isn't some sort of high pressure situation where
Right.
I'm like, oh, well, so let me grill you about this thing that you're doing. It's more, no, it's I've started basically describing it as like just sitting with a friend and just kind of talking about music, for better or for worse, and not being like, oh, well, we have to stick to these main points. Uh, we can talk about the latest problem between Taylor Swift and Kanye. Like, we can talk about that. I'm cool with that, and I won't cut it out. It'll go, and we'll just
Yeah.
create a picture of like someone's interests and influences. It's just kind of a more holistic isn't the right word, but just kind of a laid back conversational approach that's much more uh, that draws much more from the podcast and the interviews that are hosted by comedians and great stand up comics than the podcasts that are specifically for musicians.
Sure, 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 sure. Totally. So, what would you? So you started this podcast. I mean, so like, what have been some of your experiences? Like some things that you've like kind of noticed or learned or picked up along the way that you may not have otherwise done from starting this project? Because I mean, one of the things that I myself have. I mean, obviously, I have this conversation we're having now as part of one of my other projects that I work on. I have my site. I have my I do like consulting, but I have a consulting business that I run. I do website design. I do all this stuff, and it always just blows my mind, just how much you kind of gain from like investing some time and energy and resources into these things that aren't necessarily directly related to like playing the French horn or the trombone or the flute. So like, what are some of the like lessons and things that you've taken from your own, like for your, like in your, that you've experienced and learned from like starting these your own projects?
Um, People like talking about what they do, which, and if you're willing to listen and interact about it, like you can come away. I don't know it. You can come away with a better understanding of how people function. Like, so I mean, I have experience with this. I'm sure you have experience with this. When you're at a gig, um, whatever it is, just run of the mill orchestra gig, let's say. Um, it's going to be a 3 to 4 hour rehearsal, and you'll have 1 or 2 breaks of 5 to 10 minutes. Now, generally in those 5 to 10 minutes, what are you doing? You're kind of sitting. You're bullshitting. Like you're just kind of
Scrolling through Instagram, one of the best.
yeah. Like I mean, what? And if you're talking to people, it's usually oh god, this conductor, I hate when he does this, or like I wish my stand partner did this a little bit differently, and that's fine. Like I don't have any problem with that, but it's you don't really get to know people necessarily, and I found that like I talk to these people that I've never met before, much often,
Sure.
and after I spend an hour to an hour and a half just talking about anything with them. Music is in there, but like talking about TV or pop culture or whatever, and of course mixing in what they do, and I come away being like, oh, like I know this person better after an hour and a half than I probably would after 2 years of working with them. Um, and so I've really come away under like looking, and of course this is just like how it applies to me. This is not,
Yeah, of
this
course,
is not
of course.
this, but I've come away with a better, with like a real better understanding of the value of just, I don't know, like there is a time and place for just kind of shooting the shit with people, but like there's a real it's a real value of just like getting to know people and what they do beyond what they can do for you.
Yeah,
I've had stuff,
absolutely.
and I've had some things. I've had a few things come out of the podcast that wouldn't have otherwise, like playing opportunities that wouldn't have otherwise popped up, probably,
Sure.
but and I'm not, of course that's great when that happens.
Yeah, of course. Why not?
Of course that's not that's not something I'm going to complain about, but it's just I don't know. It's just more of a value of like talking to people and finding out about their stories, really, because I'm interested, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the things that, I mean, you've talked we were talking before we started recording. I mean, you just as of the recording of this, you had just posted your 50th episode. So you've talked to 50 people now. So like what are some of like the patterns and themes you've seen across like all of your guests? I mean, are there any like topics or perspectives or things that just kind of come up with like that you consistently see with them?
I mean, yes and no. Of course, you talk to enough people, you're going to see patterns, and especially if you're staying within one kind of artistic conceit. So most of what I've found from people is, especially people who are building their own brand, so to speak, to use a more sports driven term, but building their brand, building their ensembles, building their career. It's just consistency. If you're going to do something, you can't just throw it by the wayside if it doesn't reap or it doesn't show immediate result. Because that's just often that's not how life works. I mean, this is not anything revolutionary that I'm talking about, really. Um,
No, but yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to
but
hear more.
there's one a trombonist. Man, I'm just referring to the trombone players I've interviewed, but not just several people that I've spoken to referred to this idea that when you're creating something, you can't just think about it 6 months from now. Um, Especially with these ensembles that I interview these ensembles. If you're just thinking about it as this project to grab you some money here and there, that's fine. And if that doesn't work out and it falls apart, it's no sweat off your back. Like, you can do that again. But if you really want to make like an artistic difference, you have to be willing to sacrifice uh, time and money to really make that work. I've talked to a number of ensembles where, like, they were together, they spent years learning how to play together before they got gigs that paid well, and sometimes they still don't get gigs
Right.
that pay well. And we're talking about ensembles that have been in existence for like 5 years, sometimes more, between 5 and 10 years. Like, these are legitimate ensembles that have. Um, uh, I spoke with Will Lang, who is a member of a really fantastic new music group called Load Bang here in the city, and they've been around for 8 years, and they get hundreds of scores every year for their composition competition. But this is
Wow.
8 years. This is 8 years in,
Yeah.
and they had to sacrifice. They had to sacrifice paying gigs. One of their musicians had to turn down like a 3,000, a expensive, a good paying gig to go do a residency with this ensemble that doesn't pay anything. Like things like that. Like, it's with musicians and the instability of being a freelancer sometimes. It
Sure.
There can be a temptation to just kind of grab the money, which, if people do that, there's no problem with that, really. I mean, if that's what you choose to do, because we all have to pay our rent. But if you're really trying to make something that lasts, you know what? You're gonna have to turn that down sometimes to make it worth it in the end. And sure, like, down the road, that'll, if you really put the time and blood and sweat and tears into it, like, that'll reap. You'll reap the benefits of doing that in a way that you might not have foreseen, when you had to turn down that orchestra gig or that sub job for a show or whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's one of the biggest things I've noticed across the different people I've talked to, and I would add to that, just, and this kind of goes along with my own experience with this show, is just fucking do it. Just do it. Like, don't. You can sit around and talk about starting a brass quintet. I mean, I'm sure you've been involved with this sort of situation. Oh,
Oh yeah.
well, I want to start hey guys, let's start a quintet. Oh, hey guys, let's start this. Oh, hey guys, let's get together and play duets, or let's think about some, like, new music stuff. I mean, I've been there dozens of times, and I'm sure you have too. It's just,
Yeah.
and most of the time that just, it doesn't happen. And it's not because the musicians involved aren't good or willing. It's that just they didn't do it.
Right.
And that, something came up. If you're going to do something, commit to it and be consistent about it. I started, my first official episode week was August 22nd, I think, of
Yeah.
last year.
Almost a year, man.
Right.
It's August 1st right now. We're recording this.
Yeah, August 1st last year is the day I bought the mics.
There you go.
Right. So,
Happy 1 year anniversary to you
oh,
and your mics.
thank you. It's appropriate that the 50th episode went up today. But so, but the point I'm making is that since then I've missed 1 week, and that was because the screen of my computer was broken and I had to get it replaced. Like that's
Right.
the, you can always make excuses, and I've had some like come out later because of technical problems or
Sure.
because of holidays, whatever. I'll move it by a day sometimes, but um, the only time I missed it was when I physically couldn't do anything because my computer was at the Apple store. Like if you're gonna commit to doing something, you have to be consistent, or else you can't build any kind of trust with an audience, or just an audience at all.
Yeah.
If and I'm not going to say like I have some sort of huge reach. I have a pretty good reach, particularly in the city, um, but like it's consistently growing, and I've seen it a particular upswing in the last 2 months, and that's because partially in part to the guests I've had. My guests have also been more consistently of, I don't want to say a higher level, but of a more visible level.
Sure.
And I've been consistent. Like that's I could say consistency like 100 times in a row, and that
Yeah.
wouldn't
I mean, it's a great
emphasize
lesson.
how important. I'm sure, and I'm sure that's something you like are looking at yourself when you're producing content, which that's a terrible, I hate that term, but when you're producing content, like you can't just let weeks and weeks go by without content.
Yep. For sure. Yeah. So like, what is your? I mean, I'm curious in my own for my own selfish reasons. But like, so what does like your schedule look like that you keep to? So like, do you record things like do you like front load a lot of them and then tease them out, or do you record weekly, or like what does it look like for you?
It just it really it varies by month. It really does. Sometimes, um, and it's it's hard because if I put out an episode and it's not doing well, it
Right.
gets or if I have a couple weeks in a row where things don't pan out as well as I wanted them to,
Yeah.
it can get depressing a little bit. And if I already have episodes like banked for the next 4 weeks, I won't be pushing as hard for new guests. That being said, to actually answer your question, it really does vary by week. Like this week, the past 7 days, I've done I've done three, and I'm doing another one tonight. So like that's four in a 5 day period, and I have another one on Thursday. So
Right. Right.
and then I might ease off a little bit, but I might not. I'm not sure. It depends and it depends on who is responding. If I send out 10 emails and 7 people respond fairly quickly, I will set that up. I always try to like when someone responds to me, I always try to get it done as quickly as possible, as opposed to scheduling several months in advance. In advance, I mean, sometimes I have to do that.
Sure.
Like the episode I taped yesterday with this group Seraph Brass, who are all wonderful
Yeah,
musicians.
I know Sarah Brass. I know they're yeah, I know them pretty I know of them pretty well.
Yeah, so I taped with them yesterday over Skype, and we had set that up 6 weeks in advance.
Sure.
But to counter, on the flip side, I happened to be bouncing around Facebook Saturday night. So what, 36 hours ago, I was bouncing around Facebook right before midnight, and a violinist who I haven't talked to in years. She was on my first paying gig in the city. She shared a gig that she was doing last night with with a really fantastic singer who was doing an album release show and is leaving for tour tomorrow. Well, I clicked on the link. I looked at this singer's stuff. I sent her a Facebook message. She was like, "Sounds great. Let's record tomorrow." And
There
so
you go.
tonight we'll be recording like like less than 48 hours after I originally messaged her. And
Right.
sometimes it's just like that quick. I mean, part of that is because she's leaving for a tour tomorrow. Um, so it's and I don't I will record a bunch, and then I'll usually do all the grunt work a day or two before it's supposed to come out. So I'll just have like raw audio sitting on my computer for weeks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's I wish I had a more like structured answer to give you, but it's
No,
just
but that's great. Yeah, totally.
and it's very dependent on people's schedules.
Right.
I thought it would be easier to schedule stuff in the summer, because that's usually that's the slow time. But more musicians than I expected like leave the city, but I didn't.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, but I people are doing tours and people are doing this and that, and you kind of, if that means I'm recording 4 days in a row, that's what that means. And and for me as a brass player, yeah, it's much slower for me, and I'm not leaving the city. So like it was like July had a lot of time, so I decided to launch a YouTube channel,
Right.
and reach out to more people. August, now it's starting to pick up again, and I'm having to figure out how to balance um, my own personal gigs with doing something that doesn't pay at all.
Yeah. Sure. So I kind of want to make a little jump here. So on your site, you reference in your bio, there's a great little line about how you virtuosically mimed playing the trombone on an episode of what is it, Mozart in the Jungle. It's on Amazon. Is that right? It's an Amazon
Yeah.
show. Yeah, yeah. So
uh, the Golden Globe winning Amazon comedy,
I have never actually watched it,
Mozart
but
in
I
the
have
Jungle.
read the book, and I would actually love to interview Blair on my site sometime. But
If you can get a hold of her, more props to you.
yeah. So what? So like that. So how did that? How does one find themselves miming the trombone in the background on a television show?
Well, I mean, to be completely honest, um,
Honest is great.
it, whoa, hold on.
Yeah, there's like a little blip there on the video. That's it.
Yeah, okay, cool.
We're
Everything's
good.
good. All right. Yeah, well, to be completely honest, if you're in the freelance world in New York for long enough, you're going to get a call to do a TV show. And some pay better than others, depending on whether the union's involved in negotiating, fees and stuff. Um, in the case of Mozart in the Jungle, um, there's an orchestra here in the city that I started playing with when I was in school, called the Chelsea Symphony. They
Mm-hmm.
don't they don't pay, but if you play with them enough times, like they'll give you a concerto showcase. And most like a lot of a good chunk of freelance scene, or they've been in existence 10 years, and I actually did an episode with them back in the first 10 of my show. Um, if you've been around the city for a while and you kind of grew up in the freelance scene, you've probably been through that. People have gone through them. There's a couple orchestras like that.
Sure,
Freelancers
sure, sure.
pass through to keep, so they're playing, and so you make good connections. So before the first season, which I wasn't involved in, I think Amazon reached out to a number of orchestras, some community orchestras, some freelance orchestras, basically asking if their musicians would want to be involved in the show.
Sure.
I actually talked to a member of one orchestra whose orchestra turned it down, which I was like, why? But yeah, if it's just one of those things where you kind of, last season was the first season I did it. So season two, they send out really, it's as simple as you're on the orchestra roster. They send out an email saying, "Hey, this is coming up. Who can do it?" And Mozart in the Jungle
Sure.
is a fun thing because it is about about a fictional version of the New York Philharmonic. You have a fictional version of Lincoln Center, and it's just fun. The people are nice, and you run into some famous people. I mean, that's part of being a freelancer in New York, is you do weird things like this, and that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. I've been fortunate enough to be a part of Mozart in the Jungle. I'm actually, it is August, so uh, that's when they do their filming. I'm actually doing they started filming third season, and I'll be up on set on Wednesday,
Very cool.
for season three. So yeah, it's just a fun thing. It's really long days of sitting around doing that, not doing much. But why not?
Yeah,
if you
sure.
if you don't have anything else to do, why? I mean, if it's the summer and you're sitting around, sure, why not? And it's fun.
Yeah,
The people are
totally.
nice. Um, and for as much as people say, I've heard a lot of musicians crank about like, oh, it's not realistic, and my answer, I'm like, well, my answer to that is, do you want to sit and watch a TV show about musicians sitting in a practice room for 5 hours a day? I know I don't, and they do get some things right, and I mean, they do. There are some, obviously there's heightened drama and all this business,
Of
but
course, it
but
is television.
they get some stuff right. Some we like a lot of us, It's funny, and I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole, but
No, please.
in the first season, there's an episode where there's a bunch of some of the musicians of the orchestra get set out to do this weird rich person gig on Long Island, and um, I don't know if the people complaining about the unrealisticness of it in New York are missing that episode because every single person who is an active freelancer in New York has been on weird rich people gigs
Yeah.
where things are just like, what is this world? Like, I mean, I've done them, and to some extent, like doing a TV show is like that. It's like, who are these rich, famous people who are being paid all this money to do this Amazon series? That's just weird. And I'm here sitting next to them, some like Joe Schmo from the South, sitting,
Right.
talking to. I mean, I bummed a smoke off Lola Kirk, the central oboist character in the show.
Yeah.
I knew who she was, and I bummed a cigarette off her without because I didn't recognize her right away, and I was like, "Oh, you're the person." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm the person." Yeah, I'm one of the stars of the show. I was like, "Awesome," and we just like hung out.
Yeah.
And
That's cool, man.
it's just like a weird kind of surreal thing.
Yeah, that's real cool. So so Dan, where can people learn more about you and your various projects? I mean, I know. So you have the podcast, and you mentioned that you have a YouTube channel. So where can people find some of these things at?
Most places. No. The podcast. It's on iTunes. It's on. It's huh, start over there. Podcast is on iTunes. It's on Stitcher, which is the main podcast app for Android phones.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been told. I don't know anyone who uses it, but hey, it's there. Um, it's on Google Play Music, which again,
And it's
not
Divergent Paths, right?
Divergent Path. Like the full title is Divergent Paths with Dan Dunford. I think it's too late to change that name now to shorten it up, but oh well.
Sure.
So I mean I have all of the every episode is up on YouTube, which in addition to, and let's gently segue into the the YouTube channel, which I just launched.
Yeah,
Like I
please.
said, all the episodes are also on YouTube. My channel is, if you just search Divergent Paths, if you and scroll down a little bit on YouTube, you can find that. So in addition to all the episodes being on YouTube now, I've also started doing short videos that with each of my guests, which includes stuff that's not normally which is not on the audio podcast. We were talking a little bit about this before we started, but my format when I talk to people is rarely, let me put it that way, is rarely question answer based. It's because that kind of format doesn't really interest me. When I listen to, I'm going to throw some shade at NPR and WQXR, but when I listen, and they're very good at what they do. Obviously, like me throwing shade at them is like a high school basketball player throwing shade at LeBron James. Like it's stupid. But I just have no interest in this like very formatted question and answer, and then and then word from our sponsors, kind of a deal. Like that's not interesting to me. So I like to have conversations. That being said, it's fun to have like short little like a short question answer segment with fun kind of goofy things. One of the things I ask people, well, after they finish a gig, what's their first drink they grab, or you know, whether they like sushi or Thai. Just something short and fun. That's 5 to 10 minutes. With all my guests going forward, and then some previous guests. Those also come out every week. Right now, they come out on Tuesdays. The podcast drops on Monday, and then there will be a video on Tuesday with someone who wasn't on Monday, just to kind of split it up a little bit.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
kind of fun stuff. And going forward, I've already, in addition to these short speed round type videos, which I have entitled Reverse Oracle, which is weird, but in addition to that, I will be doing some short, like documentary short type deals. I've already done some filming on one of them. I don't have a specific release date for like how those. That's going to be kind of a experimenting, I'm kind of just feeling my way through that still. I'm not a person who has experience with filmmaking. I don't have a degree in it. I just know what I think looks good and what I find interesting. So I'm trying to document people who are recording albums, maybe a new music type person who's recording a solo album, or an ensemble who's just coming together for the first time, or that kind of stuff. Just things that just kind of a look into worlds that, if say you're a student at a college, let's call it Schmoolyard.
Schmoolyard.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, that's a little bit too, but like something similar to, a conservatory where you think you're going to be an orchestral trombonist forever, or an orchestral oboist, or an orchestral whatever it is. Key phrase being orchestral. If I can provide a little thing where you can see, hey, this person is recording this, or putting together this ensemble, or doing whatever, they're doing it, and they're being successful, and it's not what you think it is. If I can do that, I mean, I think that's just a success.
Yeah, very cool.
I want to provide a look like that. So that's kind of still in the works. The short speed round type videos are already dropping once a week, but the documentary stuff is still in the experimental kind of phase. Hopefully, I'll have my first one up. Well, maybe before this airs, but I don't know.
Sure. Well, so people can find more about that on. I'm sure you'll talk about it on the podcast and YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, until I get 100 subscribers, I can't change the web address to something, because I just started it. I'm still like working my way there.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Now it's like youtube.com/garbledygook of letters and numbers.
Right.
And that'll get changed as soon as I'm able. But for now, it's just easier to search Divergent Paths on YouTube rather than giving a specific thing.
Yeah, and then your site is just Dan Dun, and I'll link all of this stuff on the page. So and then the site is just Dan Dunford Trombone. Is that right?
.com, and I have all my I have an embedded player with all that that updates with all the episodes. I do stuff. Instagram is at NYC Basebone. That's where I do most of my content related business, podcast, but also like just my personal trombone related stuff. But I always have the podcast stuff. I always have the videos. I don't do much on Twitter other than read what other people say, but that's also at NYC Basebone. So. Really hear my unfiltered thoughts on those platforms. But most of the biggest platforms are Facebook page, the Twitter. So like at facebook.com/divergentpathspod, Instagram at NYC Basebone.
Very cool. We will link to all of those things. And before we finish up here, Dan, is there any last kind of message you want to leave with the audience? Any musicians out there? Anything?
Yeah. Don't be a dick. Mostly, that's it. And I know there's some people who would say that I don't follow my own rule, but
There will
but
always be
yeah.
someone talking something. Very cool. Well, Dan, thanks so much for taking the time to come on, and this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.